All right. Hello. Welcome, everyone, to Star Trek from the Holodeck, the Lower Decks edition. So, David, we are here in studio to talk about Season 5, Episode 4, titled A Farewell to Farms. If you are new to our show, you can find us wherever you listen to podcasts. Just search Star Trek from the Holodeck. Give us a thumbs up. Give us a review. Give us a good rating, a 5-star preferably. All right, Dave. So this is an episode that took a break from its immediate story.
Yes.
To have a little fun, to explore some new alien culture, while also reminding us of the Klingon culture a bit.
And give a send-off to one of its side characters. That's the thing. That the character that Klingon character, and that was the main focus in this episode, has been
Maha. Is that his name, Maha?
But like he's been with us since I think like 2 seasons now, because remember he's part of the Klingons that they introduced as the lower decks version of the Klingons.
Yeah. Well, they're wrapping up storylines, Dave.
Yeah.
They're wrapping it up, and I understand they have to do that, but at the same time, it makes me feel not sad, but just it's another word. It's not sadness. There's another word for
finality.
It. It's the idea when you feel that something you like is coming to an end and you're getting that closure that we all want, but we're also a little bit like, oh, let's put a wedge in the doorway. I don't know if I want this closure yet. I want to pretend it's not ending. Yeah. That's kind of how I felt watching this episode, because I very much was aware of what they're doing. They're bringing these characters in and wrapping them up. I will say I'm happy that they delved into the, what is it, Klawakan? Is that how you say it? Klawakan?
I think it's like Cloacan.
Oh, Cloac. Is that how they say it? Cloacan? Okay, I'll go with that.
I think.
Well, it's a made up word, David, so I'm going to say it however I want.
Yeah, it's just Star Trek language in general.
How did you say? I think you were right.
Cloacan.
Okay, so we learned a little bit about the Cloacan culture, which I feel like this is 5 years too late. I'm surprised we haven't explored this.
The bird people.
Yeah. I mean, I know we have not really liked this character like too much. Like he hasn't been our favorite character. In fact, I think a couple times we said he's a little weird, but he was also zany enough to belong in this show.
Yes.
However, if you're going to end your show, you probably should give us something that revolves around him. Yeah. Because if we go back, a couple years down the road and rewatch this, we're going to pinpoint certain characters that never got its due. And I think he might be the last character, because our Bajoran security guard, I always forget his name. Jax, he's had his moment. Ransom has had his moment. Captain Freeman has had her moment. All of our side players have had their moments, but not
this character.
Was it Miglimo? Is that how you say his name?
Yes.
Miglimo. Miglimo is the only character that hasn't really had his due. So it was a long time coming. I'm glad we were given this story, and I'm also glad that we saw his homeworld. We learned about them. It's interesting because they're not just bird people. Apparently, their entire culture is perpetuated or spurred on by the desire to seek out new foods,
culinary. And I was like, why didn't they introduce this sooner?
Yeah,
because like that's the feeling with this story that I got left with, is like they could have done so many freaking awesome stories with this character, just centered around the fact that he's going around the universe trying to figure out culinary things.
It's cheesy, but it's a fun little parallel because
it fits in the series.
Yeah, I mean, you're dealing with the Federation that seeks out new life. And here we have that parallel where they seek out new tasty foods. It's interesting, and you're right. It is silly enough, zany enough to. It really is. I'm not going to lie. I was finding myself getting a little hungry with all of the ingredients and the different types of food they were talking about.
Yeah.
So it was an effective moment for the episode. It did what it needed to do. Also, the Klingon aspect was really fun to see.
Yeah.
When is getting more Klingons not fun? It's always fun to get more Klingons. This show has definitely given us how many episodes? We've had at least a dozen episodes, right, that have revolved around Klingons in some way.
Yeah, and that's the weirdest part about like just in general, like how Star Trek, this I guess you could say new generation of series has handled alien races. The Klingons kind of get left in the dust a little bit. I mean, Discovery took on the mantle right from the get-go, but then after a while they just dropped the whole Klingon thing. Then in Strange New Worlds, they kind of did the same thing. They touched on the Klingons, but they never really dived into it. Lower Decks like dives into jumping into all the alien races and basically bringing all these characters from other alien worlds that in a lot of ways, to me, Lower Decks feels like a Star Trek series.
Yeah.
Where it's kind of like, yeah, I want to see a series about aliens. It's kind of like why I like Prodigy. Prodigy does something different because it focuses on alien races. It focuses on, more than just the humans.
Right.
Because one of the things that we love about Star Trek is like seeing the different alien races, seeing how they interact. That's why characters like Worf has stayed the test of time, the Borg. And when it came to this episode, I was really surprised how they were able to take something that I feel that Star Trek in the new era has kind of veered away from. Let's stay away from telling stories about, the core races that we all as Star Trek fans have grown to love, the Romulans, the Klingons. And here they gave us a 18-minute story of a Klingon character that is done well from end to beginning, or from beginning to end.
Yeah.
And it's like, why can't we get more stuff like this?
Well, okay, so David, you are right, and I do agree that it would be nice to get more of that. I'm gonna dig really deep here. There's a reason why we don't get as much of this in Strange New Worlds, and Discovery, and Picard. Now, obviously, they provide us the necessary aliens in order to be Star Trek. But you have to remember, David, going back to the 1960s, the aliens were simply a way to displace other races, social issues, commentary, and there was a reason for it because they had to oftentimes be subversive in their messaging because of censors, because of sensitive
subjects,
right, viewers of the time. There's no need for that anymore. So if we want to talk about black folk, we have black actors.
Yes.
And the same thing goes for every other race of individuals. So the displacing isn't happening as much because it's not needed. You don't need to be subversive any longer with those messages because for the most part, we've progressed to the point where we can actually talk about things without getting people offended as much. As long as it's done intellectually, most people aren't going to be bothered by it. So that could be one reason, Dave. And the only reason why I have to admit that it's not 100% my thoughts. I read something, I want to say maybe 2 or 3 years ago about that. When someone was airing out their grievances with the Kurtzman era, they were talking about these very things. However, they didn't come to the same conclusion about subversive television versus what we are allowed to do today. Well, there are very weird. Sometimes people got to realize that many times their complaints have nothing to do with the writing or even the production itself. It has to do with things that they have to do in order to pacify the studios and or censors of the time.
And you do have a very valid point because anyone who's actually studied television history knows that basically writers had to be creative back in the day. Nowadays, writers don't have to be creative. They can do whatever they want to say in a television show. But my pushback to that then is that's a test that's also kind of like a for me an example of why today writers need to pick up their game. Because if you have that freedom, you should be able to do something, tell a story.
I think freedom breeds complacency, Dave.
Yeah.
We said similar things during a recent discussion for a comic book. And I made a joke that I want to be oppressed. Because I feel like when you're oppressed, meaning I'm not talking about true oppression. I'm talking about when society says you can't do something.
Yes.
I feel like the people who want to do it, the rebels, will find a way to do it.
Yeah.
That's why Star Trek is so fucking good in the 60s and the 90s, because they weren't allowed to do so many things. Conservative television, that's what it was all about. You had to appeal to the largest audience, so you couldn't do things that would possibly, create an imbalance, disrupt viewership. Nowadays, there are no rules.
There's no rules.
There's no rules, so writers just do things. In fact, if Deep Space Nine was written today, we wouldn't have the Trill.
No, I don't think we would.
We wouldn't have Dax. It would just be a trans individual.
Yes.
Or a queer individual of some sort. And even though that's fine, I feel like it takes some of the cleverness away. Some of the fuck you, I'm going to do this anyways.
Exactly. And I think that's why I say is like, that's a statement against writers today where it's like everyone's complacent. Everyone is lazy because, well, I can say whatever I want. Okay, well, now you have to make it entertaining.
Yeah, now we're not yes, you're right. Now we're not saying this show or these writers are being lazy.
No, absolutely
It
not.
was just a perfect jumping off point to get into the ins and outs of why Star Trek has veered away from certain things. It's just there's no need for it as much. Although I would counter and say, there definitely is a need for it. You could still be subversive and also be open about certain other things. So, all right, so let's bring it back to this particular episode, Dave. Though much of the episode was a break from our, I guess you could say, we're not really sure what the main story is yet. It felt like it was the Orions and Tendi, but that seemed to be more of a leftover from the previous season, and they were closing out those little aspects, and it worked perfectly for a 2-part premiere for season 5. Now moving into season 3, or I should say episode 3, and then episode 4, they're getting out some of those other little things that they have to get out of the way. But in this episode, it seems like, David, they introduce an element that possibly will be the main myth arc, if that's even going to be something they have this season, which so far they have had something, that little connective through line. And it's the whatever was doing the dimensional, what was it, a dimensional rift?
Rift, yeah.
The reason why Boimler and Mariner were even on Kronos was because they were investigating a dimensional rift. And as they were doing the shenanigans in this episode, by the end, they had come to the conclusion that these dimensions were being created by something or someone for reasons that they don't know.
Yes.
And that's how it ended.
Yeah. And that's why I say, okay, I think that since the last episode where they basically introduced the parallel universe, right? When the crew of the Cerritos entered that weird rift and it opened up to the, I guess you could say, the multiverse of Star Trek, and they got to see a different parallel universe of them. Now they carry that overall story into a smaller aspect where we now know the crew of the Cerritos is studying those rifts, and they're trying to figure out, okay, who created them. This is where
I can see your smirk. You have a theory.
Yes.
I'm anxious to hear it. Go ahead.
Okay, for all of the listeners out there, I know.
It's Q.
Yes. I think that it's Q. Especially since, they've always played around with this.
Always Q with you.
They've always played. Remember, season 1, they had Q show up. He showed up on Mariner, and Mariner acted like she knew him.
Oh, that's right. What, season 1?
Season 1.
That's
at
right.
the end of season 1. So I'm like going, oh, we know who it is. It's Q.
Yeah.
It's Q.
I would be okay with that, but is that enough to use for the remainder of the season? I mean, yes, Q is a large character, but is that really what we want to see with the last season? Some Q involvement?
Well, here's the thing, Mike. My Star Trek brain basically says, okay, it's Q, right? Now, this is where I wanted to bring up to you because someone was talking to me about it. Says there has to be more people out there than Q, David. What would Lower Decks do? And I thought to myself, like, wait a minute. Lower Decks is still a comedy show. At the end of the day,
right?
And they love doing their little twists and, gotcha moments, to make the Star Trek fans laugh. And I thought about it. I said, wait a minute. What about if they were to actually bring back a character that everyone said we want to see what's going on, but that actor has never really returned to the series, even though he's on good terms with the series.
Who are you talking about?
Is Avery Brooks. And we get to see Cisco in the end.
David, listen, you're such
Mike, I'm just saying, if Cisco shows up at the very end,
this is where you become a Star Trek nerd.
Yes. Yes. And they basically, my friend who told me this, David, they will personally come and hunt me down if Avery Brooks, that is going to be the one appearance of him in Star Trek.
I don't want that. I love
Mike. That's the joke. That's the joke.
I love Avery Brooks and I love Captain Cisco.
Yes.
The mystery that is the ending of Deep Space Nine. If we are ever to explore what happened to Cisco, it needs to happen in its own show. It's too big.
That's the thing,
and
Mike.
Too important within Star Trek canon to put it in Lower Decks.
It is too big, but it's the perfect joke Mike McMahon would make to Star Trek fans.
I suppose they can have him pop up and not give us any ansers.
Just look at some of the going,
like he actually pops up as the emissary in like a metaphysical form, and like he appears. That's okay, and he has like god magic. I'm okay with that if there's no explanation. Normally I wouldn't be, but because this is a Star Trek show, meaning this is a show that is designed for Star Trek fans.
Yes.
Regular people aren't watching this unless they are a Star Trek fan. So you don't have to do all that legwork to explain who this is. We will all know it. So if they do something like that, I would be okay with it. As long as they don't actually give us any answers. Kind of like what they did with Q. Because if you remember, Q was introduced in the first season of Lower Decks, which was long before he was put into Picard.
Picard, yeah.
So rather than answering any questions that are too big to answer in Lower Decks, they just simply had him appear. And that worked. So if they do something similar with Emissary Cisco, I would be okay with that. And because it's Mike McMahon, and we know that he handles things, even though silly, he handles things very carefully. He cares about Star Trek. If it was another writer in Star Trek that was talking about this, even a writer I like, I would be a little nervous because I don't feel like anyone in the Kurtzman era has a complete and total grasp on Star Trek or Deep Space Nine. In a lot of ways, David, if you look clearly or you have been observing the Kurtzman era, they steal a lot from Deep Space Nine.
Oh, absolutely.
But they don't know Deep Space Nine.
No, they don't know Deep Space Nine.
That's why no one ever talks about it. The cast, the crew, the writers, they never bring up Deep Space Nine. What do they always bring up? Next Generation.
Yeah, because
the original series.
I honestly think, Mike, because bringing in DS9, that is a tall order, honestly. When you look at like what that production staff was able to do in that series.
Yeah.
I think, honestly, the reason why no one brings it up is because that's a high bar to set. I mean, that's a very, very high bar to set. And like if Kurtzman were to come out, it's one thing if he says, "Oh, I'm going to connect the original series," which he's doing in Strange New Worlds, or if he's doing like, "I'm going to do a connection to the Next Generation, a la Picard." Mm-hmm. Okay, but when you say, "Hey, I'm going to do a story that follows up DS9," the only true series that tackled wartime in the Star Trek universe well.
in a philosophical way as
in
well.
a philosophical way, and arguably gave one of the better endings of Star Trek, where we can actually look at it and say, we can see these characters just walk off into the sunset and we'd be happy with it.
Deep Space Nine, David, isn't my favorite Star Trek series like I used to believe it was, because I was getting confused. Meaning, I think it's the best written Star Trek series.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely the most consistent, best written Star Trek series, hands down. There isn't another series that comes close, in my opinion. Not to say this is, that sounds like I'm really talking shit about other Star Trek. Deep Space Nine is in its own class.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
I guess that's how you could say it.
That is the perfect way of saying it, because like when you look at what Ira and his crew were able to do in DS9, no other Star Trek series could replicate it, because that crew set out to do a totally different Star Trek series. Yeah,
it was very different, but at the same time, it had all of Star Trek's core values and philosophies, and that's why at the end of the day, it's a great Star Trek series as well. I don't know how we got onto this topic, David. Oh yes, Q.
and then I basically said, if I had my way, I'd have Avery Brooks show up in the very end, and then basically it's like the middle finger to all the Star Trek fans, because as we all know, Mike, we all want to see Avery Brooks back.
I think it's going to be
Captain Sisko.
I don't know, David. My theory is it's going to be Nexus Captain Kirk.
That's how you get William Shatner. And you know what? That would be hilarious too, because that would be, remember, the one get that we were saying, okay, what is the one get we want to see Lower Decks do? Because they always do something where they bring back someone.
Isn't the Nexus also considered a rift?
A rift in time.
Yeah. So I'm not saying that's it. I'm not going to stand by that theory at all. No. That was just me throwing shit at the wall. But
now, Mike,
but I would be. I might be okay.
You wanted William Shatner back.
Yeah, I would be okay with that because I stand by that. That's my biggest fan want for this season.
And obviously now you know what my fan want is. I want Sisko. I want Sisko to show up.
It's just
give a line.
How dare you?
And it would be the funniest thing ever. like he's trying to find his son. I don't know where Jaco is. That son of a jackal.
That's not even Star Trek.
That needed to be better.
That was him from The Big Hit.
That needed to be better. That's what I mean. That would be so awesome. Don't even have Avery say any lines.
For a motherfucker.
That'd be the most awesome thing.
No one knows what we're talking about right now. So,
except maybe Mike McMahon. We can pray he probably knows.
He's all, oh, I get it. He's all, ooh, late charges. I know what you're talking about.
Ooh, we gonna get paid. We gonna get paid.
You know, guys, you guys are starting to sound like a bitch.
And you know what? The best part by far was you get Boimler to say the lines from The Big Hit, and they'd be the best.
Okay, now you're selling me, David. Now you're selling me.
Boimler, because Boimler, I love what they're doing with Boimler right now, because he's trying to be that parallel Boimler by growing out the beard, and it's like, dude,
it's so not working for him.
It's not working.
I do like that every episode he has a few extra little specks. And in this episode, he has a fucking mustache and like 3 or 4 extra little like specks of hair on his chin.
I'm like, all right, Boimler, you gotta understand this takes years to build a beard. This ain't gonna go overnight. And then like the best thing by far in this episode, Boimler is like so fanboy over the Klingons and everything that he's trying to be manly to the Klingons.
Yeah, that's not working either for him.
It's not working.
Okay, Dave, did you realize that Sam Witwer was a guest star? He starred as Malor and Legnog. And Mary Chieffo, which plays the Klingon Empress, I believe, from Star Trek Discovery.
Yep.
She reprised a Star Trek role, I should say, as the female Klingon.
Yes. Dude, I was cracking up that they made the jokes about how like the Klingon women just want to have rough sex with a lot of the male Klingons.
And the boob window.
The boob window.
This is when Mike McMahon really does show how it's not about knowing Star Trek. He also understands what it is like to be a Star Trek fan.
Yes.
Meaning he knows the jokes. He knows the things we talk about and poke fun and bring up. How long now have we talked about the boob window?
Oh, absolutely, dude. Because that's a Klingon thing.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. This is why he's
That's
not
why the Duras sisters are like constant.
this is why he's not a poser like Homeboy from the first season of Picard.
Oh, Shaban, yeah.
Shaban is a poser. He didn't really know Star Trek. Mike McMahon doesn't just know Star Trek. He is a fan of Star Trek. And Metalis, I would argue, is very similar. He's a fan of Star Trek, and he knows Star Trek. In fact, David, I just had the greatest idea ever. Metalis and Mike McMahon working together, executive producer and showrunner on a series,
cool.
on a Star
really
Trek
cool.
series. I think we would get the best Star Trek we have seen in this Kurtzman era. If the two of them work together, Dave, you know it would be some great Star Trek.
Yeah, you get Mike McMahon's energy when it comes to actually trying to weave a story, and the Metalis, who's actually there to kind of control things as one of the best showrunners of the Star Trek so far. Dude, that's a good team to put together.
Yeah. All right, Dave. So overall, I enjoyed the episode. It was fun. It was relatively easy, or I should say a relatively easy watch. It was low stakes. I'm going to give this episode an 84% on the RMD score. How about yourself?
I'm giving this a little bit higher just because I like how Mike McMahon paced everything. He did a little different things. He didn't open the show like the normal Lower Decks, and I thought that was a really cool thing to do where it's not about the crew of the Cerritos. It's about this Klingon character now that he introduced 2 seasons ago.
Yeah, I like that too.
And it's now about him, and then giving him that really character arc throughout the entire episode that felt really natural, to the point where you realize he gave this character, this side character, a myth arc that lasted probably about 15 to 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And it felt real. It felt believable. And then it made me think, if he could do that to a side character, Mike, I think what that says to me is he can do something very special for the crew of the Cerritos. So the one thing that we were talking about is like, like what you mentioned earlier, that it's a bit of a downer seeing this is the final season. We're going to say goodbye to these characters. But I think when I walked away from this episode, I was like going, oh, I'm more comfortable now because I know Mike McMahon and his staff can give our characters a good send-off.
Yeah.
So
I have confidence in him.
Overall, I gave this an 89.
Okay. 89% from David. Okay, well, David, we are done then. We are coming to an end, or we should say, let me backtrack. We should say, you know what? We just need to end. I'm losing my mind. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Be sure to find us on Apple Podcasts as well as Spotify. Leave us a review. Give us a thumbs up. Also, head over to our Patreon page, patreon.com/RaymanDigital, and throw us a few bucks. By pledging $5 or more a month, you will gain access to an entire library of additional Star Trek discussions, hundreds and hundreds of hours of additional discussions. And we also throw our pre-shows on over there as well. So, all right, David, thank you.
Thank you. Live long and prosper.